Yeah, if you haven't been doing, the annual pattern thing, like now's the time to see a lot of that sign. That's the biggest thing I would do is focus on finding that sign, walking the property. You're not hurting the property now. And the other thing too is like you're looking for sign now. You can see the rut sign. You're not necessarily this is not the spot you hunt this time of year. This is just trying to set up for next year. So you're finding the sign that you're going to hunt next rut, whatever that may be. And so that's what I would definitely focus on for them. That's going to be the key. If you can't do any kind of habitat work, at least know where they are when they're there.
What's the first thing that you would do in that situation? What's the first thing? It's February, March, April, whatever postseason time frame that you're interested in doing to set you up for next season.
Yep. So if you haven't been running trail cameras over scrapes in these rut funnels and corridors, that's what you need to be finding and doing. Like, so if you have been doing that and you have a little bit of history, now start marking those dates and like planning your hunts for next year around those dates to figure out when those bucks that you're after are daylighted. And like keep a record of the bucks. Like don't just look at the one buck that you targeted this year. Like I targeted this buck, he had been using this same corridor and this same funnel for 2 years. Now, granted, this is low pressure private land, but it could also do the same thing with high pressure private or public land, or they're going to have areas that they get to get away from people and where they're still going to be chasing does. They're still going to be doing what bucks do, but finding those corridors. And if you haven't been running cameras over scrapes, then I highly recommend that for each and every person. I mean, yeah, you can have feeders out and all that kind of stuff, but like I very, very rarely ever run a feeder. And I very rarely hunt, overfeed, even though we can bait. But having the feed out there is one thing, but getting that information, like figuring out where those bucks want to be in daylight. If you're not getting that, then, go start doing the scouting now. You can walk through the woods this time of year. You can see rubs. You can see scrapes. You can see all the trails so much easier this time of year. Find that on your property. Get into those invasive areas that you never step foot in and find all of that, and then start monitoring that with your cameras to start building this history. Like, so maybe you don't have that history now, but you need to start building that. And that way you're not just reacting to what's happening. You're figuring out what's happening way ahead of the game and knowing. And like sometimes people like want to do scouting in bedding thickets and looking for sheds. I don't really hunt where I find sheds. I find sheds all the time. Sometimes I find them in food plots or big ag fields and stuff like that. But like I'll find sheds just randomly in spots turkey hunting that like I would never hunt here. So like just because you found a shed in that area doesn't mean you need to go hunt that next season. But you can go in and like really break apart the property. Start looking at big picture, because where these bucks are traveling these routes in this time frame is usually where they can cover the most ground the quickest and check all the different doe groups that are coming out, because the doe groups are not really moving around that much. They may migrate if you've got soybeans and stuff like that from that really early time frame. But once you get into kind of the heart of the hunting season, basically your does are kind of doing what they're going to do. And these bucks just want to be able to check as many does as they can on these loops. And so figuring out where all these pinch points are, and it's a lot of transitions. Like if you don't have fields, it's transitions in woods, like just different habitat types coming together. That's typically where they're going to run, because they'll spend a lot of time in that really thick stuff. But when they're doing this, they're traveling. Like they're trying to get somewhere quick, but they want to stay covered. And so finding those areas on your property and setting those properties up, or setting those spots up with mock scrapes. I was realizing like, man, this buck was on this side of the farm. This is a large property. I could map out where a deer was in. I would see a deer or catch a deer on camera on this side of the farm, and within 24 hours, I could map his trail. If he just went to cameras and walked a straight line, he would walk over a mile in less than 24 hours. And a lot of times this is when, this is that rut time frame. They're not doing that every day and all throughout the year, but there's certain days where they're doing that. And when you've got your cameras set up over scrapes, not corn feeders or, just random places, but like when you've got them in these like really good corridors and you're set up on these, then you're catching that action. Like you're catching like how they want to move the property and check the most areas of the property securely but quickly. And so I would catch these deer that do this, and like there's 2 deer that that's these two deer right here actually both carried, or they had the same pattern, like very, very similar bucks, same farm, and those trails that it's like those little easy places for them to run but stay secure, and they're hitting those scrapes down through. And they may not even have to hit them, but they're traveling through there, where that scrape would be, because that's where they want to go. And so, like, you go through the property and you find and locate these areas on the property, and then you start taking and figuring out, well, what day did they show up in daylight?
Yep.
The most. And then you start putting all this into a catalog. I mean, Daniel Williams, like, man, when I was listening to that podcast, like, he's talking about that. Like, he even probably did it more to a T than what I do, but like, he had it on point, exactly what I've been doing and trying to figure out when to be in the stand to catch this interception. And so now that you have this data that you can figure out what days it's going through and when you need to be there, well, now I'm not reacting to something. Like, I am actually looking at the wind and the weather and like, well, I want to plan to be there on these days. And if I've got the wind to hunt this one, I'm hunting this stand. If I've got the wind to hunt this one, I'm hunting this stand. It gives me an idea of like where to go. Because I may not have had a picture of this deer for a week. I don't pattern a deer based on, well, he's coming in 2 or 3 days in a row and I'll go in there and shoot him. That's not what this is. This is like acting before it happens. So you want to know, well, if he showed up there last week, where's he going next? And making that move to where you need to be, so that you're not just reacting when you get a picture.
Yeah, and I love talking about this, and I love that tactic in particular, because you're kind of taking the decision and making it way ahead of time. So
Yes.
so when the time comes, I'm the world's worst about this. Probably why I didn't kill anything in Alabama this year, or at least not to this point. We still got a couple days, but it's like when those days roll in, I don't really have. I've got stands or areas in mind that I want to go hunt. But when it gets to be that day, I check the wind. I'm like, oh, do I want to go here? Do I want to go there? And I'm still choosing between 3 or 4 things. And what you're saying is maybe set up these spots where it's like, okay, if it's December 18th and I've got a west wind, I know I need to be right here.
Yeah.
And it's made like, so you can just look at your calendar, look at your wind and say, okay, I already know where I'm going.
And there's a little bit of weather that will kind of dictate what part of that area I need to be in. For instance, this buck that I just killed, it was on a super, super cold, windy day. Like, the wind was blowing really, really hard that day. In fact, me and Reed duck hunted that morning, and I mean, it's just bitter cold, like low, like it was in the teens that morning. And which I texted a bunch of my buddies and everything. I was like, I don't think the deer are going to move this morning. We're going to duck hunt. And all the ones that deer hunted are like, man, we didn't see nothing. I said, well, you better get in there early then, because like these deer are going to move early today because they've been holed up because it's so bitter cold. It's that huge, drastic, sharp change. A lot of times that morning hunt's not really good. They'll move more midday, but then you got to think about, like, man, it's super, super windy. Like, they're not wanting to get out in an open area and feed. Like, they're going to be a little more, tighter to closer cover, and like they're going to feed where they can be blocked by that north wind, because they don't want to be cold any more than we do. And that, like, I'd already had this deer showing up. He had kind of showed up with a doe, and I needed to be on the stand on a Friday. Of course, I was at baseball practice that Friday. And I was like, well, I know he's going to be with that doe in that area for a day or so. And then the weather and everything just kind of lined up perfectly to be there. I've already had, good success during that weekend. The Martin Luther King weekend is just golden down there. It's like that post rut or chasing little bitty fawns and stuff like that. It's like you can really, they draw the big ones out of the thick stuff. And so that's what kind of geared me towards going to that stand. Yeah, if you haven't been doing, the annual pattern thing, like, now's the time to see a lot of that sign. That's the biggest thing I would do, is focus on finding that sign, walking the property. You're not hurting the property now. And the other thing too is, like, you're looking for sign now. You can see the rut sign. You're not necessarily, this is not the spot you hunt this time of year. This is just trying to set up for next year. So you're finding the sign that you're going to hunt next rut, whatever that may be. And so that's what I would definitely focus on for them. That's going to be the key. If you can't do any kind of habitat work, at least know where they are when they're there.